Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be continuing this series on trigonometric functions, like solving trigonometric functions by applying the product rule. This series is the third of the episode, or episode 3 of the entire series. And you guys know that whenever I do, like, each particular episode involves a new question, and we're going to be applying the product rule on this particular question. But before we do that, if you're new here, please write the first page or the information on the screen right now. Write it in your notes, because it's important for you to have the TRIG notes as you go through this series. The people who have watched episode 1 and episode 2 probably already have this information. So it is just basically a sheet that helps you as you go through this series and as you solve more problems. The sheet can also be used when we go on to do the trigonometric function for the quotient rule, the chain rule, the power rule, or even other mathematical concepts or questions that you have that involves trig, not necessarily derivative or differentiation of trig functions. So just an important stuff to have all together. And I believe with time, as you use it and apply it more, you get used to memorizing them, even if you do not require to do so in your course or in your class or whatever your teacher might say. So for this particular one, we're going to start with this question: sin x multiplied by secant x. Now, what this is saying is that we're going to do derivative. Now, when we're trying to do derivative, we're going to first of all know that this actually looks like the general formula. F of x, large F of x or capital F of x equals small f of x multiplied by g of x. And what that is basically saying is that if we have that, we're going to apply the product rule. So when we apply the product rule, apply PR is product rule, then we have derivative of the function, derivative of the function ddx of the function of f of x is the same thing as the derivative of the first subfunction. Since we're applying product rule, that's how it works. Of the first subfunction multiplied by the second subfunction plus the derivative of the second subfunction ddx of g of x multiplied by the first subfunction, which is just f of x. And that's it. When you have that, when you do that, then the way of that is, basically this is what the product rule is. The product rule is this information. So now that we have what the general function looks like, which is this one right here in red check mark, and the product rule being applied is this one, then we can be comfortable to start applying that information to our question. So we have f of x, large f of x equals sin x multiplied by secant x. What that tells us is that we first of all have to identify what f of x is and what g of x is. For this particular question, we have f of x to be the first subfunction, and the first subfunction here, as we can see, that's sin x. So f of x is going to equal sin x. And the second subfunction is g of x, and g of x is directly in relation to secant x. So now that we have that and we've identified that, let's start solving. So we have f of x, the derivative of f of x, which is derivative of sin x secant x. So derivative of sin x secant x equals the derivative of sin x here multiplied by secant x plus the derivative of g of x which is secant x multiplied by f of x, which is just basically sin x. So we have that to be derivative of sin x is cosine x secant multiplied by secant x. Okay? See? Now, let's go back. We know the derivative of sin x is cosine x. How did we know that? By using the information here. If you guys have been following the series, you're going to know that that's what I do. I go back and forth. So the derivative of sin x here, what did we have? We had that to be cosine x. So therefore, that's why this information here, like this whole information in the red gorgeous circle, is cosine x, right? And then we just bring down secant x, because that's what we do. Since we pretend like it's a constant, and we just bring that down. Like when you have derivative of say 2x squared or 2x, you're not gonna, like, in the product rule does not require us to do the derivative of the first subfunction multiplied by derivative of the second subfunction. No, it is the derivative of the first subfunction multiplied by just the second subfunction, then plus the derivative of the second subfunction multiplied by just the first subfunction, nothing else. So that means we're going to drop down secant x. Then now, what is the derivative of the second subfunction? What is the derivative of secant x? Let's go back. We see that the derivative of secant x is what this is, and that happens to be secant x tan x. So we can put it here. So that will be secant x tan x, and that multiplied by the sin x that is just chilling right here. So we're going to just bring that down. So that's sin x. Now let's go to the next page. I'm just going to rewrite this. So we have cosine. The answer of everything will be cosine x, okay, multiplied by secant x. I'm just copying what we just did at the bottom here. Plus secant x tan x, secant x tan x multiplied by sin x. Now that this is what we have, this is what's going to happen. So we have cosine x is the same thing as basically cosine x, but I like my work neater, because even though this is our answer, right, we've applied the product rule, this is basically an answer, this is perfectly acceptable. I like to make my work neater, just like I did in episode 1 and episode 2. I'm going to do the same thing in episode 3. I'm going to try to make my work much neater than this. If I want it to much neater, there's a way I'm going to do it, which is for me to basically clean it up by using the trig function note at the beginning. So we have cosine here, and then we have secant x. But what else is secant x? Secant x is also 1 over cosine. So I'm going to do that multiplied by 1 over cosine, basically to clean it up. Not required, but I like to do that. So then we have secant x here, okay. Secant x that we have here, we can also do the same cleanup we did. And what did we say that is? Secant x is the same thing as 1 over cosine x. So that would be 1 over cosine x. Like I said, this is not necessary. This is just for students like myself who like to leave our work as neatly as possible, rather than having a whole bunch of whole bunch of trig information. It can get confusing, but if you can clean it up, I advise you to clean it up. So what is tan x? Tan x, if we go to the previous page, tan x can also be known as sin x over cosine x. Okay, so we're having fun. So that's sin x over cosine x, right? And now the last thing we have is multiplied by sin x, right? So that sin x just drops down. So now what can we do? We can cancel information out. We have cosine x here, doesn't really stop anything or make the work harder. So we have that cosine x and we cancel that out, and we have cosine x and then sine x over cosine and sine x. We can't really cancel anything out, but what we can do instead is to multiply them together, right? So we can end up, our answer becomes 1 plus sine x multiplied by sine x is the same thing as sine x squared, okay, divided by cosine x multiplied by cosine x is the same thing as cosine x all squared. Now, one thing you guys need to know is, just a side note, sine x all squared is the same thing as sine squared x, okay? It's not too much information, not too much, just like we can have like yeah, so basically that's what is going on here. Sine x multiplied by sine x is not sine 2x. It can also be called sine squared x, or it would just be sine x all in brackets squared. So this is not a mistake. This is another way to represent it, and I'm gonna represent that way. So yeah, that's really it. And yeah, so we have that, so we can call that 1 plus, now 1 equals to 1 plus sine squared x over cosine squared x, same thing as 1 plus, now sine x over cosine x is what? What did we see? We saw that sine x over cosine x, what it is? Oh my gosh, that's the same thing as tan x, right? Since I'm trying to make our work neater, we can just have that to be tan x, right? Sine x over cosine x, which is what we have here. Now, since we do that, because we have squared, that means we have two of them. Like we could have even just done it here, right? This here could have just represented tan x by itself. And this one here, sine x over, could have represented another tan x. So the same thing is what we're just going to do here. You could have just done it that way, but I just did it this way. No, doesn't really matter. So plus tan x squared. And that's because sine x over cosine x is tan x, but they both have squared, so we end up being this. So our answer, a clean-up version, our answer will be 1 plus tan squared of x. So this is what is going on right here. And the reason why I keep cleaning it up is because, for example, now, if your teacher gives you the expression 1 plus tan square x, is that not easier than looking at the top expression answer, cosine x multiplied by secant x plus secant x times tan x times sine x? That's a lot of information. But if you can just do the second one right here, which is just 1 plus tan square x, you don't have any problems. So you just have this, and this is the best answer I would recommend. But again, depends on what you like. If you're one of those people that you just want to apply the product rule, you don't want to go through all of this trig information, you can do that. If you're one of those people who do not mind practicing your trig and becoming a master, inshallah, in doing your trig and making your work neater like myself, then you can do that. You can do my second one. I'll advise you to do the second answer, 1 plus tan squared x. So this is the end of the video. Please, if you like this video, subscribe. And if you have suggestions, put it in the comment section. If you would like to get in touch with me, my contact information is in the description box. And one thing I also want you guys to know is that since this is a series, there's a link in the description box for a series on product rule, series on chain rule, series on quotient rule, and power rule, and all of them. They're all there in the description box. If you need more help, go to the description box. That's what it's here for. It's a way for me to communicate with you guys, so that you guys can have the absolute help possible with your work. And that's the goal. And again, on the screen right now, as you can see, there are end cards to show you guys like the next video of this series, or basically the entire series playlist. So follow that as well, and make sure you subscribe. And I wish you guys all the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Take care of yourself. Bye.